Wolfpack Nation, thank you so much for joining back in here today as we got exciting episodes today. I'll tell you, this is one that I've been so excited for, as I've been a huge fan of this guy and of his content for quite some time. Again, we got Josiah, and again, tell me your last name again, Josiah, because you said it, Rico, right? Ritzko. God, I was like, let me just go ahead and clarify that because I don't want to totally bash it. So Josiah Ritzko from FANCO Wrestling, which again, if you have not checked out his content yet, it is a must do. I know that for all of us NC State fans, there's a ton of us out there right now that have become or have been a huge NC State wrestling fans for a long time. And so now that we've been up there competing with the best of the best, you got to be in touch with the Penn States, the Iowas of the world, and also see what's going on with NC State as well. And this guy definitely does an amazing job covering it. So, Josiah, thank you so much for joining us. We're thrilled to have you on the show for sure.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great introduction, Leighton. I appreciate, being here on your show because I love talking wrestling day in and day out, and I'm excited to talk about that with you guys here tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. So first, Josiah, just for those who maybe don't know much about you per se, again, so if you wouldn't mind, just kind of give a little bit of background about yourself. So you're a former wrestler, kind of and then just kind of what you're up to, kind of what led you to starting FANCO Wrestling, things like that.
Yeah, sure. So I grew up wrestling. I come from Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Western PA is like one of the strongest wrestling bases in the entire country. And so that's where I'm from. I grew up there, wrestled there through high school. Well, after high school, I no longer wrestled. I went on to school at Penn State. And of course, we know that they're a huge wrestling program. One of the best over the last 10 years. And, of course, NC State's been competing with them in and out. And so I went there, and so I went to school there, and that's really where, I was always a massive wrestling fan, but going to those Penn State matches, every single match I could go to, seeing just the intense, exciting environment in Rec Hall and at the Bryce Jordan Center just really elevated me to a new wrestling fandom. And from there, I went through school, graduated, and that's when I ended up starting FANCO Wrestling a few years after I graduated back in 2019. And from there, I started it with the intention to have daily conversations with wrestling fans. So I want to spark conversations with wrestling fans in a positive manner. And so I started that YouTube channel, and it started out with just a couple people having a conversation. Yep. And then it grew to a couple hundred, and then now we're at like 30,000 subscribers plus just on YouTube, and that's not to mention all the other social media platforms where we're at such like a great, exciting place now with our conversations. We're even getting ready to launch a new podcast where our boy Kairini is actually one of our first guests, which is kind of cool.
Nice.
But so we are like, since then we've just grown tremendously, and it's just been awesome to meet great wrestling fans like you, Leighton, and like so many others out there in the country. Just having those conversations has just been what's made FANCO Wrestling so worthwhile.
Absolutely. Well, again, it's first of all, one thing I do want to say is, has anybody been competing against Penn State over the last 10 years or so? I mean, it's I think Penn State's won 9 of the last 11 if I did my math correctly. So I mean, just but again, we'll get into that. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely something because, speaking for me personally, wrestling is one of those things that has definitely grown a lot. I mean, first of all, just talking about the ACC in general, I know we've said multiple times, but the ACC really has become, just a builder of great teams, great wrestlers. I mean, I remember, I think we had Coach Hall on, our assistant coach, and he was basically saying, when he was talking to the previous head coach of Florida Pop, and how he pretty much said, like, if you got into the top 25, you were going to win the ACC. Like, it's not even close. It's like, but now, you have obviously Virginia Tech, you have NC State, Pitt's, really done some amazing things. Virginia's gotten up there. North Carolina obviously has turned some heads as well. Just waiting on Duke a little bit, but again, they have theirs ever so often. But it's just it's great to see it growing, and also to even support, like even just the NC State, the fan base, the fan support has grown tremendously over the last couple of years. And obviously, got to give a hats off to Popolizio and all that. But what have you been kind of overall kind of if you kind of can kind of add on to that, kind of seeing how much that wrestling has grown in the ACC, NC State, like, you know, North Carolina, like just like it's just kind of add a little bit more on that, if you don't mind.
Oh yeah, for sure. So I the first thing that pops into my head, right, is NC State tweeted out this photo from, I want to say it was like 2012, 2014. And the first photo was this comparison. And the first photo on the left was from 2014, and the gym was like empty. There were some wrestling fans there, but it was kind of like curtained off because it just looked better, and because there weren't enough fans there. And then it was a photo from maybe 2 or 3 years ago, even. So I mean, this is just a couple years old, and it was a recent photo of Reynolds Coliseum packed, like just fans just hyped and excited. And it was just like the difference that there's been in the fandom and excitement in Raleigh at NC State just alone in the last, over the last decade has been incredible. I mean, I myself have become an NC State fan in recent years. And then you want to talk about ACC, like you already mentioned it, Leighton. Like it's funny because NC State's been one of the top contenders in the entire country. But then, I mean, last year and years before, even a couple years before too, you had Pitt, you had Virginia Tech, not just, contending teams in the top 25. They were all in the top 10 at points in and out, which is incredible. And then UNC, of course, has had national finalists in the last 2 years. They've really made a name for themselves in wrestling where, you got Big Ten. That's the biggest conference, and it's going to be hard to beat a Big Ten with all that competition as far as excitement. But the storylines in the ACC, I've said it before, but I think it's probably the second toughest conference, and some of the best storylines, some of the best rivalries overall. So it's just it excited me as a fan in the last couple of years.
No. Well, and obviously too, one thing is which I wanted to kind of discuss as well is that, I kind of grew into wrestling, really around the time that Gwiz came to town and, started hearing about him, just mauling people. And I was like, well, let me check out what's going on here. And so that was really kind of when I started, getting into wrestling. And, my family, they went to Cary High School. And, for those who are around the Raleigh area, that Cary High School has been a dominant high school program for decades and decades. So they immediately fell into love with wrestling, NC State. But, with one thing which I immediately noticed watching wrestling is the rivalries are different. I feel like there's a lot more of them. There's a lot of team rivalries. There's a lot of individual rivalries. Like I would say that Sam Latona and Jacob Camacho is one that that for some reason that is just another level of a match. But I think even too, unfortunately, since we're not going to see again, that Hayden Hiley and Mekhi Lewis, that was it was a respect. I think they really did truly both respect each other a lot. But it was you knew when they would face each other, it was going to be one of the greatest matches of the entire country. Absolutely. So, what is it about wrestling that just kind of takes it up that notch? Is it just that it's so, kind of the physical, mental edge of it, really, that you're, always trying to get that little mental edge you can over your opponent kind of deal? What is it really that kind of sparks that?
I definitely think that's part of it. All the 1,000 little battles that go into a wrestling match, and just the nature of a wrestling match in general. It's one guy against one guy, and you're competing to see who's the best. It's not, decided based on a judge. It's not decided based on anything else other than this guy is the best. Now I know a lot of people get into the ref and this and that. No, it's best man wins, right? And I think that's really what leads to so many rivalries and just team to team rivalries, right? And I think in a lot of instances too, recruiting wise in certain classes can bring teams up that weren't necessarily huge teams a couple years ago. Even recent rivalries, NC State and Virginia Tech in wrestling has just become honestly one of my favorite rivalries to watch. And it's not just at the top where you have the Penn State and Iowa who have been battling out for over the last decade, or Oklahoma State and Iowa, who's been battling out for many, many decades.
Right.
Now you have even more of these teams. And then you go not just ACC, but in like the SoCon, you have Campbell and App State, who are just like two behemoths in the SoCon that like some of the fiercest rivalries.
Yeah.
And then you get just the fans involved, right? I mean, like I was at the NC State Virginia Tech match this year, and it was one of the fiercest environments I have ever been in wrestling.
Yeah. Well, and because obviously one match which stood out to me, obviously I know it stood out to you and every other person, was obviously, again, we spoke about already, the Hayden Hiley versus the Mekhi Lewis match. And again, it's one of those things that I feel like that those who kind of look at it on the outside, because I think the final score was 3-2 if I'm not mistaken, but like it was just so low scoring, not a lot happening. And so somebody who's never watched a wrestling match before might be like, man, this isn't really like exciting, like this isn't really that big. But it's like, no, I mean, these guys are literally so good that it literally just is one guy making one mistake, and that's going to be the match. And Mekhi Lewis, he made one mistake, and Hayden made him pay for it. And then the ACC championship, Hayden made one mistake, and Mekhi Lewis made him pay for it. And then it was over from there. But I mean, again, for like Hayden Hiley to lose to Clay from UNC the way he did, was an absolute heartbreaker, obviously. And I know we'll talk a little bit about that. But I mean, for him to come back and beat a guy of the magnitude of Mekhi Lewis, I think honestly I don't know a ton about Virginia Tech's history, but I'd be hard pressed to not say that he's going to go as one of the greatest wrestlers that Virginia Tech's ever had, for sure. But I mean, just like you said, the environment, seeing the excitement, him raise the roof, like it was just like, to me, that was one of my favorite moments in my history of an NC State fan. Just like, oh, it was juicy. It was unbelievable. So yeah.
It absolutely was. That was one of my favorite matches, and like you said, like it was such a crazy weekend for Hayden too. It was like on Friday night he had lost to Clay, and that was like, I mean, nobody expected that to happen. Like it was just like mind blowing. Yes. Hayden hadn't lost an ACC duel. He hadn't lost in any of those matches before that, and then all of a sudden he gets pinned out of nowhere, like unreal. And then the fact that he battled back, like he didn't let it weigh on his mind. It's just, I'm facing one of the top guys in the country, former national champion, and I got to find a way to beat him. And it was insane. And that just speaks to the level of wrestling in the ACC too, right? Mm-hmm. Like that Clay, was able to do that to Hayden, was able to stick him. Like it's just the talent in the ACC has gone up so much as well. And I love seeing that. I love seeing those rivalries.
But also too, do you kind of think of it too, though, because I think heading into ACC tournament, that even though Clay, was the number one seed, everybody pretty much circled Mekhi, and it was either Mekhi or Hayden that were more likely going to win it all. And so, like they kind of say, like in baseball, for example, like it's just a matter of just did things go your way. And so, do you kind of see that as, because I mean, obviously Clay got the first seed for a reason, but yet he wasn't really kind of necessarily the favorite kind of deal. So I mean, do you feel that's kind of part of it with wrestling as well? Just like, that kind of thought as well, if Hayden didn't just dip his head down a little bit, too far, that he probably would have beaten Clay, kind of a deal. Like, do you think that kind of has a lot to go into it, kind of in the thought process?
It definitely does. And I think the importance of a tournament is you're going to get the best man out at the end of the day. Like, it doesn't really matter where they're seated. I mean, in a sense, it does. Like, you're going to have tougher matchups as the number 4 seed compared to as, a higher seed or whatever it may be. Like, so it makes sense. And you're right. Like, fans kind of went into that thinking, yeah, it's going to be Hayden. It's going to be Mekhi, likely, going to be the champion. And like in wrestling, and a lot of times, right, it's incredible. It's awesome to see a pin like that happen, right? It's awesome to see, like a couple years ago when Nick Piccinini pinned Spencer Lee. Like, it's crazy to see something like that happen. But everybody kind of knows that it's likely going to go a different way next time. Like, pins, I don't want to say they can be flukes at times, but like,
definitely can.
The best wrestler is going to win on that day. But crazy things happen, and I think it just makes, like, those things, in a sense, a lot of times can be good for a wrestler, because they maybe get out of position a little bit. They can learn from it. They can improve from where they are. And I think that's what Hayden was ultimately able to do, come ACCs, and then with his solid performance at the national championships. I mean, I know he didn't come out as the national champion, but still an incredible performance in Detroit.
Absolutely.
So I had a question on kind of backing up a little bit more on in general, like for someone who's never watched wrestling, college wrestling, or a casual fan like myself. I mean, I'll admit this is the first year that I've really followed, college wrestling. It helps when your school is one of the best in the country, obviously. But what's one thing that you would say? And you've touched on a few things: the one-on-ones, the kind of the head-to-head matchups. What's one thing that you would tell a casual fan or someone who's never watched wrestling why they need to pay attention to it and why it's exciting to get into?
Before we continue, I want to take a quick second to tell you about our sponsor, Flightland's Jessup Insurance Group, that has your whole world covered, with agents in 5 offices throughout eastern North Carolina to help you decide how much coverage you need, offering policies for home and auto, recreational vehicles, commercial, crop, health, life, and employee benefits. They are able to combine options to find a comprehensive solution that works for you. Flightland's Jessup protects the things you love so you can spend less time worrying and more time enjoying them. Find them on Facebook and Instagram at Flightland's Jessup. You can also visit their webpage at www.flightlandsjessup.com. So please make sure to go and check them out.
Well, I think the biggest reason and one of the main ways I'd get a fan into college wrestling is through the team aspect, right? Whatever school you go to, whatever school you cheer for, they're going to have some sort of rivalry. Right. And that's what just makes sports in general exciting. Yep. And with NC State, who's able to compete with rivals like UNC and Virginia Tech, whether you know anything about wrestling or not, you can go into a match like that and cheer for your team and get excited about that. Like, it happened all the time with me back at Penn State while I was in school. Like, I had friends that I would bring to the matches that knew nothing about wrestling. I mean, absolutely diddly. Mm-hmm. And I was still able to bring them along when they wrestled Ohio State or Iowa or Michigan, and I was able to kind of teach them the fundamentals. Not enough. Right. I don't need to go into all the details about this, that, and the third and all these crazy stats, right. But like, okay, a 2-point takedown is when you take your opponent down to the mat. An escape is when you get up off your feet from the bottom position. Just those basic things. We can get into the nitty-gritty later as you become a fan, but get the basics and go to those dual meets. Cheer for your team. Be excited in that environment, because if you're a casual fan or you've never watched wrestling and you went to that Reynolds Coliseum match with Virginia Tech and NC State and you weren't a fan before, you're going to be going back to another match. I can guarantee that.
Absolutely.
So piggybacking off of that, much like Michael, I'm new to wrestling. I'm pretty close ready to get into the nitty gritty of it. I think I had a chance, like I said, to go for my first time, and Leighton over there's got me more involved in it, thankfully. And I completely agree with you. It was like, oh, I hate that school, so like the heck with them. Just go. Like, I don't even care. Yeah, it doesn't matter what it is. Yeah, But now I'm starting to learn the finer intricacies of it, and that's where I've actually started watching your channel, because you do a great job of breaking things down. So you're like, now my casual eye is looking for this, and I can say, well, yeah, that should be a reverse, or that should be, back is on the mat, or whatever the case may be. I'm not quite enough to get into the technical terms, so I'm very general. But I will say, just to give you props, that I enjoy your breakdowns on your videos, because I'm like, oh, okay, got it. So.
Well, I appreciate that, Greg, because like that's one of the things that I really find important. It's because wrestling is such a small sport, right? It's not like football or basketball where there are all these fans. Like even schools that don't have a good basketball team or good football team, they're still going to get a lot of fans because of the sport, because it's such a big fan base. Whereas wrestling, it's smaller. It's an extremely tight-knit community. However, we need to expand beyond that. We need to bring others into the conversation. And a lot of times, like I found, like unfortunately, like a lot of certain wrestling fans, like if you don't know anything about wrestling, well, you're dumb or you're an idiot or we don't want to invite you in. This is our no. Why are we being like that?
Right,
if we want to grow, we need to teach others about the sport. We need to bring them into the conversations, teach them through the team rivalries, and get them excited about it, and then get into the nitty gritty. And that's why, like Greg, I appreciate that you like that about the channel, because that's so important for me, is to bring fans in. I've had so many new fans come in and say that to me, like, oh, your channel has been so helpful and for me understanding what's going on in the sport. And I've also had fans that were wrestlers from 10 years ago or fans from 10 years ago, and they got out of it. Life got in the way.
Sure.
And they just couldn't do anything, and then they were able to get back into wrestling by through the videos, so that they can understand all the storylines that are going on.
Well, because one thing with wrestling is that it's not an exact science in terms of that. Like with like hockey and soccer, if it crosses the goal line, then it's a goal. Like, period. It's black and white. But with wrestling, a takedown, even though you may say it's as simple as taking your opponent down to the mat, it's not necessarily that simple, kind of deal. And I've seen it many of times. Because that's pretty much every call. Pretty much every call is pretty much a judgment call to the referee, and that's to me kind of one of the most toughest things in terms of getting people, like, for example, my wife, into it, which is like, well, what is a takedown? How is that a takedown? It's like, well, it's kind of a gray area. So what would you kind of say to that? Like, like a kind of a, like a, not to say a hater, but like a doubter myself, saying like, how can you really teach somebody something that it's not black and white? It's very much up to the referee kind of deal.
For sure. I mean, that's one of the, I think, issues that wrestling has got into in the last couple years, because like thousands of years ago, wrestling's one of the original sports that there were in the Olympics, in the world. It was just like, I mean, actually a lot of times it was like to the death,
right?
But it was simple rules. Where now, over years and years and years of wrestling being fine-tuned, you do have these little details, such as like a danger rule, which is like, okay, if you're on your feet but your back is exposed for more than a few seconds, that's a takedown, even if the guy doesn't have control. And I'm not trying to get into the nitty gritty there, but it's like for a new fan or a casual fan, you're like, what the heck was that?
Right.
And in some ways, for wrestling fans and for wrestlers, those rules can be great, but it can also, wrestling at times can be a detriment to ourselves with those own rules. But like, to a fan that is confused about that, I would say give it a little bit of time. Watch a few more matches. It can happen in those weird instances, and a lot of times in extremely high pressure situations, high pressure matches, Makai Hayden, that type of deal. It's going to happen more often, just because those are two of the elites in their sport, and it's just one little thing, or one little move, or one little kind of piece of technique that happens, you're going to get that ref call. And more often than not, I would say things that happen in a match are not because of the ref. It's, you have that occasionally, right? You have that ref getting intervened in, but that's really with any sport.
Sure.
Yeah.
95% of the time, it's based on the teams, it's based on the wrestlers, it's based on the athletes, rather than the ref intervention. And that's at least the way I look at that.
The one for me that always just irks me is the stall. Like, just call it. Just, only way you're going to get the action moving. Just call the stall. Just call it. Let's keep it moving.
I agree.
It's like watching soccer.
You get like if they're backing up, hit them with the stall. That blows my mind too. It's like, if the guy's backing up, if he's doing nothing, hit him with a stall call. Don't wait, and then like you wait until the third period in the last 30 seconds, and then you hit him with a stall call. And most of the time, you're not going to get hit with a second stalling call with 30 seconds left. And I'm just like, refs, let's be a little bit more consistent with this. I agree. Yeah. I totally agree.
The other one is like, when he's laying there with his pillow and his binky, it's a stall. Like, sometimes they're just laying there. Like, let's keep it going. Like, don't be afraid. Yeah. So anyway,
let's keep moving. I agree.
Yeah. So it's again, it's a fine science, to say the least. But just like you said, it's one that, again, I've always said that it's the most exciting situation, like in terms of sports. That it's it's the most exciting moments that you could see, especially like when it comes down to like a lot of matches like Virginia Tech and NC State, where it'll come down to that last match, and whoever wins that match wins the duel. It's crazy. But I also will say though that in the NC State Iowa match at the neutral site, that Ryan Jack, he had that defensive pin. I will say that right now. That was and that to me, honestly, I think that is one situation where I truly think that if that call would have gone our way, we probably would have won that match. That's my thought on it. But it's if it's a buzzer candy and nuts, but I mean, just that would have been huge.
No, I agree. In that instance, the ref, I believe, was afraid to make the call
because that would have been huge
because of how
huge.
And it was. He was pinned. I was screaming on my couch watching that. He is stuck. He is stuck. I'm like, why are you not calling that pin? Because so many other times, like if you're at a smaller tournament or something, that's getting called. But because it's a big match, and oftentimes because refs are a little bit afraid of Iowa, that's not getting called.
Because, I mean, again, I get it. Because then they, it's a COVID freshman that is about to get a defensive pin on a 6-year wrestler from Iowa. So I get it. That would have been a huge call to have that loss and have that win for NC State. So I get it. But yeah.
I mean, that happens in any sport, Duke in basketball, Alabama in football. The refs are afraid of Coach K. Well, not anymore. And Nick Saban out there on the sidelines. But
Right.
Sure.
Right.
Absolutely. Well, thank you again all for tuning in with us here for part 1 here. Hope you all enjoyed that. First of all, make sure to tune for part 2 here as we dive a little bit more into NC State, kind of talk about last year, start talking about next year a little bit, and also to Coach Pop as well. But make sure, again, if you haven't already, Josiah, first of all, go ahead and plug in. Where can fans find you, find your stuff?
Fans can find me over at FANCO Wrestling on YouTube, on Instagram. That's just FANCO Wrestling on all the social media platforms. And the one thing I talked about earlier was we're launching a new podcast called More Than the Mat. You can download it on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And one of our first conversations is with Kai Arini, one of the wrestlers on NC State's team. And we talk with him about him tattooing and his hobbies outside of wrestling, which is the conversations that the fans have been wanting to hear, is like, what happens off the mat? We know these guys on the mat, but what do they do outside? And Kyrie is such a cool story. He tattoos his teammates. He tattooed his mom. The coaches weren't always excited about that happening in the program, but that's More Than the Mat, and that's the great new venture we're looking forward to growing.
I love it. I love it. Well, and also too, make sure and State fans. Well, again, just first of all in-state wrestling fans out there, go follow this guy for sure. Go follow FANCO Wrestling. But if you don't mind as well, so that way you don't miss out whenever we release part 2 here, and also too for any other in-state content, make sure to hit that subscribe button if you don't mind as well. Give this video a like, so that way YouTube will put this in front of more NC State fans, and also to give us a follow as well on Tuffy Talk Tuffy Talk now on Twitter and Instagram. But thank you all so much, and we'll see you all for part 2. As always, go Pack, y'all.